Hi, everyone. I am Amanda Beekle. Welcome to Birds on the Niagara. Thanks for signing up. We're really excited to start the festival off with this presenter. I work at Birds Canada. I'm the Ontario IB coordinator, and I will be facilitating today's webinar. So now I'm just going to introduce Larry Mathewson from the Niagara Falls Camera Club, who will be presenting today. His presentation will help you identify the best locations to take photos in the Niagara region and tips to get the best image you can. So Larry will share some of his images of birds in their natural environment and share some successes and challenges and some of the ethics of birding and photography. So a bit about Larry. He is a local photographer and videographer in Ridgeway, Ontario, with a keen interest in a variety of subjects, including sports, landscapes, waterfalls. Good thing he lives next to Niagara. Wildlife, birds in flight, and underwater videography. He's the digital chairperson for the Niagara Falls Camera Club and a member of the Buffalo Science Museum Camera Club. And Larry can be seen most days walking with his wife, Nora, visiting conservation areas and trails, and in search of the next great image, he says. I will pass it on to Larry right now. I'm going to just mute myself and take my video off, and I'll be in the chat and watching the Q&A. So take it away, Larry. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amanda, for that introduction. And glad to be here. Thanks you to the Birds on Niagara for inviting me to present here. And I always like to share my ongoing successes and failures in photography and birding. As I said, I was a videographer as well as a photographer, and now an avid birder in this area, and usually far-reaching, but due to the pandemic, we've been limited to close-by drives. As I said in the past, I'm a photographer, I'm a birder, I'm both. And in this screen, you can see what my favorite bird is. These are awesome, and they're ospreys. And we're lucky enough to have a few of them show up along the Niagara River every summer. They start about March and they go through to September. Some of them will stay a little longer than others, but if you travel the Niagara River on a regular basis, you'll see them perched in trees and perhaps even with the fish, because they sometimes call them fish eagles, and they are awesome flyers. So to start with, you can see my screen, correct? Amanda?
Yeah, I can see it perfectly.
Okay. Just want to make sure everybody's seeing this, because I can't tell from my end here. Everything looks perfect. Okay, the arrow at the bottom shows approximately where I live in Ridgeway. And I thought, well, we will take you. Can you see this arrow going around the screen?
Yeah, I can see that too.
Okay. Sometimes the mice arrows don't show up. So we're going to take you on a journey here along the northern shore of Lake Erie, through Waverly Beach to the Peace Bridge, down along the Niagara River through several creeks to Dufferin Islands in the falls, and then on to Niagara on the lake. And then later, if we reach that far in the allocated time, we'll show you some of the back road driving that we do, that we find birds in and around the back road. So what better way to start than seeing a bird in my own front yard? And the way this started, and we always have our cameras ready because we can look out our back window and our front window and see birds in the trees, because we have a 100-year pond behind us with a few great trees that the birds land in. And this hawk, I think it was a Cooper's hawk. Now, try not to correct me, because I'm not a really good birder. I have to reference the manuals and the books quite often. I use ebird.org to identify birds, and I use a book that we bought that's in the car, and we flip through it on a regular basis because I constantly forget the names of some of these birds. And how we saw this one was it hit our front window while it was trying to pick up a dove that used to sit on the flower pot in the front. And they usually watch, and it flew in and hit the front window and took the dove down, sat in the front yard. And if you're familiar with birding and you've seen them, once they get a catch and they don't want another bird to see it, they will, what they call, mantle their catch. And they spread their wings out, and you can see them sitting there and it looks like they've got broken wings, but they actually have their catch underneath their body to protect it against other hawks picking the bird up. And this one was mantling on the front yard, and I ran and got my camera. I ran out into the driveway, and it looked at me and it tried to pick the dove up, and the dove was as big as it was and still flapping. It made it to the sidewalk. Then it started to dismantle the dove, pulled some of the feathers off. Once it got enough weight down and the dove died, it actually flew off to a light pole across the street. I had several pictures, and my first thought as a photographer is, I want that perfect shot. Well, my first thing is get the picture. It doesn't matter what your settings are, try and get that picture. You're better to have a picture than have no picture. So oftentimes when we're out looking for birds, we see a bird that's too far off, we can identify it, but it's not a good shot, but we do take a picture far off. Now, in this particular case, I'll show you the settings. I have my mirrorless camera set at 1/16 of a second, f11, 10,000 ISO. Exposure compensation is set to 0, and I'm shown at 600 millimeters. This is actually the minimum distance that I can shoot with the new lens that I had sitting on the camera. So I had to back up in the driveway to try and get the bird in frame. So this was the result of that picture. I have a few others, but my wife always says they're too gruesome to show. So I tried to keep the blood at a minimum. In our backyard, we have a neighbor that has fruit trees. And in the spring, in about March timeframe, we have cedar waxwings that show up. And sometimes we see one or two, and I say they're scouts. And they come out and they test the fruit, and then they fly away. And a few days later, if the fruit is good, 100 of them come back and they clean the tree off. The neighbors don't like that when their fruit disappears, but we also have bushes that have these red berries. And I know the berries are firm throughout the winter, but in the spring, as they ripen and ferment, they shrivel up, and I believe they get quite sweet. And there's 3 of these bushes, and it's really amazing when you see all these cedar waxwings fly in. And we know to watch for them after the first couple show up. We say, okay, keep an eye out in the morning because they'll be there bright and early as the sun comes up. And they'll do all kinds of shenanigans, hanging on upside down, and they'll pull these things off. And sometimes they have to really give it a reef to get the berries off. And they toss it in the air and they'll swallow them whole. There's about 3 of these bushes, and there's a fence behind us. So we actually have to go out into the backyard and try and shoot through the fencing. It's one of those chicken wire fences. And so you can see that I'm setting at 1/1600th of a second. F14 is what my camera defaults to when I have the 500 millimeter with a 2x extender on. And it defaults to F14 when I'm shooting at 1000 millimeter. And you can see my ISO is 12,800. That's one of the beautiful things about a full frame mirrorless camera these days. Doesn't matter if it's Canon, if it's Nikon, if it's Sony, they all will shoot at very high ISO with little or no problems, especially if the background is a light background. Darker backgrounds tend to show a little bit of the pixelation. My show wouldn't be complete unless I showed these turkeys, because just down the road from us a little bit, we have lots of farmers' fields. And these turkeys show up, and the toms are fantastic to watch because they'll strut their stuff. And for a while, there might only be a half a dozen toms out there, the male turkey, and they have some great colors. And they'll strut their stuff around trying to show who's the bigger, the better of the toms, trying to land a female. And sometimes you don't see the females around until a little later, but there's always 5 to 10 of these turkeys in full plumage and showing their full colors. And of course, this field is a little bit away from me, so I'm shooting again at 1,000 millimeter, zero exposure compensation, and my ISO is 2500 at f14, and I'm shooting at 1/1250th of a second. Getting a focus at 1,000 millimeters is kind of an interesting deal. One of the issues with the Canon R5 is it has bird eye recognition. You think you can see an eye there anywhere? The turkeys don't have eyes that really show up. So fortunately, what the Canon does at this point in time, and I'm not sure about the Nikons and Sonys, but the Canon has a 3-position focus. It goes to the bird, it'll go to a head, and then to an eye. If you capture the eye and it turns its head, it'll shift to the head. If it turns its body, it'll shift to the body. So oftentimes, I'm shooting at 20 frames a second in silent mode or electronic shutter. I'll get 40 or 50 images with just about every conceivable position. So you can pretty well pick and position your composition the best way you would like to see it. We do competitions with the camera clubs, and so oftentimes more images gives us a lot of opportunity to pick the right photograph to enter in competition. The biggest problem I have is on an average outing where I'm shooting all day, and I say at least 4 to 5 hours, and we're going to various parks and locations, I'll probably come home with several hundred pictures. So I have to get very good at culling the images. And I use several pieces of software in order to do that properly. Some of those fields that we drive around in the back roads in the Ridgeway area, in the wintertime, where the snow plows go along and they widen the road, and you'll see a little bit of grass sticking through on the edge of the road. And today, even today, at this time of the year, we've seen the horned larks and the eastern larks on the side of the road, along with the snow buntings. And they start to show up and they'll run along the side of the road. And it's actually possible to drive your car very slowly down the road and shoot right from the car, because all they do is they stop and they look at you, and they're picking up bits and pieces of weeds that have seed deposited on the side of the road. And so we have lots of these images, and sometimes they fly a little bit ahead and then they'll stop. But we don't chase them for too long, because We don't want to disrupt what they're doing. And these guys, they don't seem to bother too much. I've seen them in the last 2 or 3 weeks, and they're more interested in feeding. And our car is also a hybrid. And so when I creep along at 2 or 3 miles an hour, the car engine does not work. We just hear the road noise from the wheels. And if the road is fairly clear, we're almost silent when we roll along. So we don't stick around because we don't need to. If I'm shooting at 20 frames a second, it doesn't take me more than probably 2 or 3 minutes to get some very nice images. This year, I haven't quite seen all the snow buntings yet. At this point in time, I'm shooting because it's small bird and they do what I call flitting around. And I shoot at 1/2000th of a second. Again, I'm at 1000 millimeters with my longest lens, and that's the 1:500 with the 2x extender on. One of the issues with the longest lens and the extra 2x extender is you may lose some detail in the feathers when you're shooting from that distance. So you need lots of light at f/14, and you do get a lot of depth of field. So here's a closer shot, and you can see a little bit of the grass sticking through the snow. And oftentimes these guys are mixed in with the snow buntings. And there's another one called Lapland, I think, and it looks almost like a snow bunting, but I've been unable to separate that bird from the rest at this point. Here I was shooting at 1/16th of a sec, or 1/1600th of a second, f/14, and my ISO was at 4000. If I suffer from pixelation, I will run it through Bridge, Adobe Camera Raw, and create JPEGs from my raw images. I shoot raw and JPEG. And because of the white snow, in order to get a histogram that doesn't show the snow as gray, because a camera is forever trying to make an image a median color. So it turns black to gray and white to gray. So we're either adding exposure compensation plus or minus. And you can see here, I've got exposure compensation +1. And what that does is it overrides the automatic setting in the camera and gives me white snow. I haven't taken the bluish, I do take the bluish color out, but I haven't in this case. And I'm still shooting at ISO 4000. So I think I can show you the histogram here. So this is a luminosity histogram, and it shows the results of this photo even in its cropped mode. So you can see this left edge is black, and that's if I have this large component at this edge, that means my dark colors would be blacked right out. I don't get any detail. If the white is way to the edge on the right hand side, that means the white is blocked out and I have no detail in the white. So this is a well-distributed histogram. Now my camera will also show an RGB histogram, so I can tell if I have vibrant reds. Sometimes your reds and blues and greens have a different histogram, and it's nice to see the three of them. This one is just a black and white histogram. So I get that in the camera viewfinder as I'm shooting pictures, and I can modify my settings so that I'm not blown out in the whites or blocked out in the blacks. I'm hoping I'm not giving you too much information here, but this is supposed to be also a workshop as well as showing the resultant pictures. So now we're going to move away from my house and we're going down towards Waverly Beach. And Waverly Beach, yes.
Would this be a good time to ask a few questions?
Sure.
Okay, we have one question in the chat, and Tammy wants to know what exactly pixelation is.
Oh, Okay. Pixelation is where you get a bunch of dots, a bunch of dot patterns in your dark colors. And your background will look mottled. And what happens is you have red, green, and blue colors in any picture. And when you have too much pixelation, someone would look at the dark colors and see spots of red, green, blue in its worst form. And pixelation destroys the detail and the focus of your image. The same pixelation happens if you go to ISO that's at a real high rate. So the 12,800 in a normal DSLR, generally a DSLR camera, you would limit your ISO to 1600 to 3200. And it's just a number, but that's the sensitivity on light. And if you allow too much sensitivity, it turns all your colors into pixels. I don't know if that was too deep description.
I'm sure you could even go deeper. Dave Bauer has his hand up right now. I'm gonna just click allow to talk, and if he has a question, he can ask it right into his mic.
Sure. I love to take Dave. I know Dave. Go for it, Dave.
Actually, Larry, I had that on by accident.
I'm
hi, thanks for joining us.
I thought you were going to ask me some high-tech question. I was going to go, I don't know the answer.
No, I wouldn't embarrass you, Larry.
Okay, well, I'm going to mute you again, and you can go back to your presentation, Larry.
Thanks for joining, Dave. I appreciate it. So when I showed up at Waverly Beach, thanks, Dave. When I showed up at Waverly Beach, the first thing that I saw was these killdeer, and they were nice enough to squawk and get my attention. Of course, I wasn't ready to take pictures, so they flew around and then they passed by in front of me. And it was kind of great because they're a very small bird and they fly real fast. And I was actually able to capture a couple of images of these killdeer at 1/2000th of a second, f/14, and the ISO was 2500. So you know I had a lot of light because of the blue sky there. And it's always gratifying when a guy like myself that shoots birds in flight can actually get a picture like this with detail in the wings, the beak open, and a little catch light in their eye from the sun shining as they go by. And of course, when I'm shooting against a bright sky, I have to give exposure compensation. Now, I shoot full manual in my R5 Canon. And what I do is I preset all of my settings, my speed, my focal length, and my ISO. My ISO, I let auto roam, and it usually in full daylight stays pretty low. 2500 in a mirrorless camera is a very good setting. I give myself exposure compensation of 1. So that's like turning the ISO up 2 notches. So the camera would have selected probably a 1200 ISO, but because I added 1 to it, it moved up to 2500. And again, I'm at the minimum extension on that 500 millimeter lens with the 2x on it at 600 millimeters. So they were really close to me. And of course, the second shot is when he actually looked close at me as he went by. You can see his head turned in a little bit. I think I took probably 30 or 40 images and I kept 2. One of the major issues these days with high-speed cameras is being critical on getting rid of those images that you really shouldn't keep. And when they all look great, you go, oh, I love this, I love this, I love this. Storage is an issue because each one of these is fairly big in size, especially if you keep the raw ones. At this point, these are all reduced down to something that fits on the screen. It's 1.3 megapixel in size. So that's from my 45 megapixel camera. I've cropped this down to 1.3 megapixel as a JPEG. It's still 300 dots per inch, which is suitable for printing. I just took this last week. This is the same Waverly Beach that I got those pictures at in the summertime. And you can see the ice build up at the mouth of the river. And Waverly Beach is just a little bit still out at the lake. And we get shove ice up along the shoreline. And it's fairly thin right now, but as the ice melts, which is almost all the way across the mouth of the river at this point in time, it will push up ice sheets that probably will rise up maybe 15 to 20 feet before it melts away. And you can see a lot of people, they go out and have fun running on the ice. The actual shoreline goes right up to where the ice is at this point in time, the piles of ice. This is the trail one of the trails that we go down at Waverly Beach. And because I watch ebird.org and I get a daily report from them of both all the birds that were sighted in the Niagara Peninsula, which amounts to 40 or 50 or 100 birds every day. I get the Google Earth locations from the birders. And I also get another report that's the rare bird sightings. And those are the ones that I've indicated I like to see because I don't see them often. And I watch that one more closely because I actually dive into Google Earth to try and decide where I'm going to go the next day. As a retiree, I have lots of time to go various places every day. And every time, and my cohort in crime, my wife, who's sitting next to me here, she's shaking her head and saying, oh, every day it's the same thing. Where are your feet going to take me today? And I go, I haven't looked at the report yet, so give me a second. What time is it? 5:45. So a little deeper into the trail. So now we're going to move on down to where the river mouth heads into the Niagara River. And right at the mouth of the river, we have the old fort. It's called Old Fort Erie. And it's a great place to go in the summer, and they do have events there. And we drive down the Niagara Boulevard and start from this area, and you can see the big trees there. Sometimes there's an eagle sitting in those trees, looking out over the river, mostly on the right-hand side. But so we drive slowly here, and sometimes that eagle is sitting there, and that eagle would just look at us. And I think I know where that eagle's nest is. And I look for it about the end of February every year because they mate for life, these eagles, and they always come back, and I have permission to go into the private property to view them and they've raised a chick every year for the last 5 years. So and of course, the next question is from Nora to me, how many eagle pictures do you need? And I go, I want that next best one. So we go a little bit down further, and this is the Peace Bridge. On a clear day in the winter that I took last week, and there's about 3 foot of snow piled up at this corner. At this corner, the river goes from a mile wide to about a half a mile wide, and so there's a lot of current here. And so on a normal day, even in the winter time, there can be shiners or small minnows around this corner, and they get churned up by the current. And on some days, there are eagles galore. And I'm talking just about every kind of seagull. There's every kind of seagull you can imagine, because it's quick food and they fly and they land and they fly and they land. And so sometimes an eBird, we get notice. In the spring, when the ice disappears, the water gets warmer than the air. And oftentimes this bridge totally disappears in the fog. So it's tough to shoot any images of birds when this happens. It makes for great landscapes or slow shutter camera shots, but not so good for shooting birds. This is not a current image. This was what year? Well, it is January 1st of this. No, it was 2018 when I took it. And the reason I put it in here is because it's very unusual to see a black swan in our area. And my neighbor used to say to me, "Oh, I always see a black swan." And I say, yeah, sure. Black swans are Australian, unless someone has one as a pet or has a farm with some black swans in it. I believe firmly this one came from a farm and it just decided to fly away. I was driving down the boulevard by myself and I had my 60D camera. That's the one I use for underwater, and I carried it as a backup, and it had 18 to 400 Tamron lens on it. And that was an earlier lens that I had that I really enjoyed, a huge zoom lens from 18 to 400. And I pulled off into what's called Mather Arch, and I got out of the car and I walked up, and this black swan saw me and it started walking towards me. And that's when I knew it was not shy of people. And if you saw this bird in person, you wouldn't like it if that thing came up to you like it knew what was going to happen next, because the legs on this thing are about 1 inch in diameter and it stands about 3.5 foot tall. It's huge. And it just gave me that look like, and what do you want? All of the Canadian geese that were around there, and there were hundreds that day, were given this one wide berth. And it was an awesome image. And I took a number of images and then I just carried on down the boulevard. And then I said, geez, maybe I should go and get a different picture. And this is one that I'm really proud of. I came back a little while later and it had moved down from where it was at Mather Arch all the way down to the river's edge by the wall that I showed you previously. And it had its head tucked under its wing and it was sleeping amongst a couple hundred Canada geese on the trail, on the walkway that's there. So I parked the car, I walked down, I got close to it with my camera, and I knelt down in the grass probably 10 feet away from it. And all it did was open its eye, look at me, shake its feathers like, you're back again, and closed its eyes and went back to sleep. It had no fear, and I got some fantastic close-up images that are to die for, because when I take them and I tell people I got this, and they go, how on earth did you get that? So I put my name on it so people wouldn't steal it off the web, because I put it on the web. I know they can still steal it, but. So I'm at the Peace Bridge. And we're standing at the corner and we have our cameras set at high speed. This is my R5. So I'm shooting at 20 frames a second. And as the birds are going by, I'm set at ISO 3200. and 1,000th of a second, because I'm using a mode called panning mode. And I lock in my focus and I pan with the bird as it flies by. And I'm still using a +1 exposure, and that's how close they are. This is the minimum distance I can shoot with that lens, 600 millimeter. Also, at the same location, these birds will hover right in front of you because they're not afraid of you. I don't shoot gulls in general, but I know some of the members here love going and identifying all the different gulls. And you know, some of these gulls are so big, they're almost the size of an osprey, and they have no fear. And they will come and they'll steal a fish from other big birds and or each other for sure. Also, that's how close it came. And I'd say, yeah, I could reach out and touch it. The focus distance on this lens is about 5 feet. And I think it was about 6 feet away from me, and it just flew right by me. It was looking at the water and it looked at me and then kept right on by. Now this bird, we went down specifically to shoot that bird, and it's called a black tern. And it was only here for 4 or 5 days, and I think it was migrating somewhere else. And it was identified on ebird.org. And so we hopped in the car, we're about 10 kilometers away, and we drove down to the Peace Bridge, and we spent an hour down there, and there was probably 40 or 50 of those birds dipping in the water and flying. And so they were flying real close to us. So we were able to get them looking at us, flying together. And we're shooting at 1/3200th of a second here, f6.3, ISO 1600. Focal length was between 400 and 800. Because I had a 2 times on that lens as well. And it was really neat to see these guys because we don't see them here ever, and we haven't seen them since. And that was 2020, September. They are quick, and I probably took 300 images just to get a dozen that were in focus because they flit by so fast. We were lucky to get them. Okay, now we're going to go past the Peace Bridge and we're going further down the river.
Okay, maybe I'll stop you and ask another 2 questions we have popped up.
Great.
One from Michael Todd. Do you have stabilization on or off at the high shutter speeds?
There's always that question about stabilization. Is it good to be on or off at high speeds? I believe the camera doesn't even operate stabilization when you're at 1/3200th of a second. I leave it on all the time. There's 3 settings on my lens, 1, 2, and 3. 1 is the setting for static objects. 2 is for panning, meaning you're going left to right. So what it does is it turns off the stabilization internally in the camera for horizontal vertical and only gives you the horizontal version. And number 3 doesn't show you when you're in focus. It only focuses when you take the picture. I don't like it. I don't use it. So my lens stays in number 1 99% of the time. And that's on because in the new mirrorless camera, if I turn off the stabilization in the lens, it turns off the in-body stabilization on the camera as well. I can't separate it from the in-body stabilization. So it's great to turn it off if you were shooting video from a tripod, but not good when you're trying to shoot birds in flight. So I leave it on all the time. Thanks, Michael, for asking that question.
Yeah, seems like a hard thing to do. Okay, so last question from Marg here. Did you use the R5 to take the close-up of the black swan's face, which was such a beautiful picture, by the way?
No, that was the 60D. That was my 18 megapixel camera that I used for underwater, and it's still functional. It's an 18 megapixel camera, shoots 6 frames a second, and it had a Tamron lens on it. And that camera sells for, you can get it for $400 or $500 now. And the Tamron lens is used. You can get them probably $400 or $500 as well. So pretty inexpensive if you wanted to get into a decent camera. I mean, the only time it's not as good as if you're shooting fast flying birds at 5 or 6 frames a second. You're really better at 10 frames minimum per second. I don't know if that answers the question. I'll move on. So, okay, I took out all the details on this because this is a composite image. This is actually 10 frames a second, and that's the same two birds flying from left to right. And all I did was put through Photoshop, put one image on top of the other because the sky is the same color all the way through. And so you see all the wing positions. And I put these swan pictures in, swan, oh my gosh. I put these barn swallow pictures in just so you could see the results of a high frame rate camera. It shoots at 10 frames a second. My previous camera, and that was a 7D Mark II Canon. And it was a mechanical shutter. So all the time that we're driving and stopping, we're looking at the various trees in the neighborhood. And sometimes you'll see an odd shape on the tree and you look over and it's a hawk. And this is a Cooper's hawk. And of course, he's ready to take off because he also spotted us. And they don't call them Hawkeyes for a reason, except that they see you way before you see them. And so sometimes they don't care. If they're intent on getting food, sometimes they'll let you walk right up to the tree and they just go, "Hi, how are you?" And you get some great pictures. And my favorite pictures are not just of a bird in a tree, but a bird flying. It's bird in flight. So this one was taken with my R5 camera at 1/1250th of a second, f11, and the ISO was 8,000. And at minimum distance. So I was probably on the side of the road and that tree was probably 100 feet away. So this is an extreme close-up of a mute swan. And I really love the detail in the feathers and the water on the feathers and the dripping water from its beak. And this was along the river, and I'm shooting at 600 millimeters, 1,000th of a second, f11, ISO 1600. So it's bright daylight, and this bird does not care that I'm there. They just show up, and today, it's the tundra swans that are here. This week, there's hundreds of tundra swans in the Niagara River. And there was a little bit of a ice edge along there, and they were all swimming along or on top of the ice. And so I took pictures like this. This is like a golden hour picture. And I'm at 1,000th of a second, f14, 12,800. So the light was leaving and I had to allow the camera to go higher ISO. But you can see, because it's a light background, I don't show any pixelation in the background. And I've also given an exposure enhancement of 1. And I'm likely at 1,600 millimeters because I can crop the lens on this camera. Even at 1,000 millimeters, it goes 1.6 times. So it's 1,600 millimeters. It gives me the chance to shoot these images from a farther distance. So here's a juvenile, immature mute swan. And it was sitting there looking at me, and it's standing in shallow water. And so it hasn't disrupted the water, but you can see the colors that they have before they get their true plumage. And it had a real funny position on its neck, but that's why I took the picture, because it just sat there. I was shooting the white ones and it just said, "Huh, I'm not afraid of you." So, and there's another one that I took at a different time. July, 1/640th of a second, f5.6, and 300 millimeter. So I was very close to this one, and you can see the water on the head beating off the head. And a lot of times all you see is the butt end up in the air. So you wait until they come up, and as soon as they lift their head up, the water's dripping from the beak or dripping from the fur. So along the river, there's lots of stumps and broken trees. And you always hear this guy. He's a house wren, and they have a very distinctive sound to them. And they flit around and they pick the bugs and mosquitoes out of these trees. And they're hard to get a picture of. You have to be pretty good at catching them. And on occasion, they'll sit and look at you. And this one had a little light in its eye, and it just turned its head just perfect and sat right up on top of the stump for me. I'm still shooting at 1,000 millimeter and ISO 2000, f14, 1/1600th of a second. I know a lot of people have seen these on farms, and sometimes they are. But we also see a lot of them with no farms around. And this one had chicks. We didn't get the chicks because as we pulled around the corner, I said, oh my gosh, it's a guinea hen. And it went, oh, and it took off, and the babies ran into the tall grass and they disappeared in a heartbeat. I wanted the baby picture, but the big one didn't go. It just stood there, and like, you didn't get the babies. So, and that was right from the car window. 1/1600th of a second, ISO 5000 at 1,000 millimeter. And we can shoot right from the window of the car if we're fast enough. And sometimes we're not fast enough. So this is a picture of one of the creeks that crosses into the river. This is Frenchman's Creek, and it's closer to Fort Erie. And this is there's a circle route path that people can ride and walk along the river. It's great for summertime exercise. And this is also a fantastic place, that bridge, to stand on and take pictures of blue heron and egrets. And so frozen, of course, there's nothing there. On the other side, on the river side, there's always ducks in the river. And these are your traditional mallard, male and female. And they'll take off or swim the other way. So sometimes those buildings are actually on the buffalo side. And I'm shooting at 1,000 millimeters, ISO 1000, f14, 1/1250th of a second. And depending on the camera you've got, you might need a faster speed to get the wings in focus. The Canon R5 has such good stabilization that I can hand hold, and all of our stuff is handheld primarily, and still get this in perfect focus. And of course, in the summer, while we're looking on the creek side, you turn around and look at the river side, and here come these great white egrets. And they're always flying by and squawking. And this one actually has some neat feathers, and this is in the springtime when they're getting ready to mate. And I'm shooting at 1/1250th of a second, f8, and 500 millimeters. So I do not have my 2x extender on, and this thing was fairly close then. And of course, you see I'm always shooting in manual exposure. Now on the creek side, we get them fishing, and the water is brown, so it doesn't make for pretty water, but it does give you a dark background to shoot these guys. And it's very hard to shoot them because it's a dark background, but the birds are pure white. And you have to turn the exposure down. In this case, I did not turn it down, and I had auto ISO on, and 1/1600th of a second. So in order to try and reduce the white, I turned up the speed of the exposure. So you can adjust 3 different things to make sure your white is not washed out, and that I would still have details in the feather here. Otherwise it would just be plain white everywhere. And these guys, when one is getting fish and the other one's not, all of a sudden he wants that spot. So he'll fly over and threaten him with his claws. And the one underneath is saying, I'm not moving. I got the best spot here. But the branch he was on did sink. So again, this is this week, and we're about halfway down the river at a place that we sometimes walk through in the spring and summer. And a lot of people walk their dogs here in the winter. So it's a good path built out. And we see all kinds of birds along the shoreline here and in the bush. So it's a great place for us to walk. And once again, you have full access to the Niagara River and all of its birds. And in this general area, there's a few dead trees, and eagles like to land on them. And because they're downriver, I always say these ones are US birds, and we wonder where they keep their passport. This bird is almost full grown. It's still got some of its white feathers that a juvenile would have, and it's not fully white on the head yet. And I'm shooting only at 1,000th of a second because they flap a lot slower than the little birds. And f8 and 600 millimeter, ISO 800. So it's a bright day. In order to get the black or brown to show up in the foreground of the bird, you have to give yourself a +1 exposure compensation so that you can see the details in the feathers. And the next one is a second later when it decided it didn't like me and it took off. But I love those shots. Those are my favorite shots right there, except for the trees in the background. Remember I told you the seagulls oftentimes are pretty brazen? Well, up and down the river in the spring, you'll see these juvenile eagles flying. And this one actually had a fish. I don't know what kind of fish. And we saw it from the car when we were driving, and we found a parking spot and pulled over and saw this seagull chasing the juvenile eagle. And the seagulls have better maneuverability than the eagle does. And all he can do is try and fly faster or drop his fish, is what the seagulls are trying to get him to do. He didn't drop it. He flew over the trees, and then the seagull didn't follow. This is downriver a little bit again, and it's a favorite haunt for some of these birds. This eagle was sitting there, and the second we pulled up, and I got out of the car and I was quite a distance away. I don't have my settings here, but I don't know if I even have this. Yeah. So you can see I had a very narrow view in my histogram of the settings here because I was quite a distance away from this guy, and it's very cropped in order to get a picture of him. So this is my favorite, the ospreys. And in the summertime, several photographers and birders go to select spots along the river where these osprey always show up because the water is very shallow. And they will show up anytime from midday to dark and fish for fish, and then fly either back to their nest or just to a place to sit in a tree. And here I'm shooting at 1/2500th of a second, f7.1, ISO 1000, and a +2/3 EV at 500 millimeters. So I'm using the 1:500 without an extender on because this bird flew right at me. And this is how this camera performs with this lens. It gets the perfect focus on the eye. And the bird's mouth, or the fish's mouth is open here. saying, "Oh my God, where am I going?" So the next thing he goes to is that same dead tree that the eagle was in earlier, and lands. And the funny part is sometimes these fish are so big they don't keep their balance on a tree. And after they land, they'll be pulling away at the fish and they lose their balance and their wings come out like, whoa, I have to get control again. Here's a poor osprey. He's just learning how to fish and he missed his fish and he got all wet. They have waterproof feathers, but if they take several dives, which the juveniles do, and this one is a juvenile because he hasn't got all of his full feathers yet. He's learning and he's not learning well yet. He has no fish and he's trying to dry off and he's fluffing up his feathers in the sunlight to try and dry off. I'm shooting him at 1/2000th of a second, f9, ISO 2500, and plus 1/3 EV at 500 millimeters. A lot of the people that live along the Niagara Boulevard recognize our cars. We have 2 different cars that we use. And they'll wave to us when we park either in their driveway or along the side roads, because we've talked to them and said, "Can I park here for a bit to take a picture?" And they say, "Yeah, that osprey comes here 3 times a day." So we know where to go and who to talk to. And it makes for great photography. Sometimes there's 2 or 3 photographers and sometimes there are 2 or 3 birders that show up with their binoculars. This guy was so close that I could zoom in and crop this thing and get a full shot of him with the scales on his legs. And what's funny with these guys is if they've been fishing and they've been eating fish on the side of the river, they want to clean their claws and their legs because they have fish scales and blood and everything on them. They'll fly along at full speed and they'll drop down and they'll drag their legs in the water for about 50 or 100 feet. It's really funny to watch because you go, is he landing? Is he going after another fish? No, he's just cleaning up. And when they go after a fish, they just totally disappear except for their head in the water. So this is a successful hunt. He's got a huge fish and he's eating the head off. They always start with the head because the brain has the best protein for them. And then they eat eggs if there are any eggs. But you can see those claws. They're really digging in. 1/2500th of a second. And what I'm waiting for is if he doesn't like me standing there and takes off, he's going to drag that fish with him. And sometimes it's really heavy. But if he takes off, he's gone. He leaves real quick. My pictures wouldn't be complete unless I shoot these dirty birds. These are turkey vultures. And there are lots of them in the summertime. And we also have the black vulture. And if you look carefully at this vulture, let me make this bigger. Look at the feathers on his back. See the white in there? Well, that's poop from vultures that have been sitting in a tree above them. They will go on each other and it's disgusting. But I took his picture because the detail on the back of these guys looks sometimes purple. It's got all kinds of colors of the rainbow. And you'll see them all the time flying by. This is a current picture just taken in January 30th. 1/1250th of a second from the roadside because these guys were everywhere along the edge of the ice, and the ice pack is right here along the river, and there was hundreds of Canada geese sleeping, and these guys were just sitting there on the edge. You should see them try and get out of the water. They're so big and heavy, and they have to use their wings to help them get up on the ice shelf. And they're really cool to see in the hundreds. And here's a juvenile one here. And they always get up and they shake their wings to shake all the water off before they stick their head under their wing and go to sleep. And you can see some of them are already asleep here. And they're really cool to see, but you need a fairly long lens. I'm shooting at 1,000 millimeters here. Your average cell phone would only show a couple of specks. There's a juvenile with his wings out. And they fly long distances to get here. Okay, this is Dufferin Islands. And
Now
where
that you're
are
looking
we?
at the map, I'll ask the next question.
Okay,
I kind of answered it. Debbie McKay asked if there's a map available of some of these trails. She's not from the area, but would like to check them out when visiting. I told her that for birding, I use eBird to check out hotspots, but do you know of any good trail maps that show good trails of the whole Niagara region?
nothing of the whole Niagara region, but I have amassed a list of named trails and places to go for birding photography that we have amassed over the last few years, and that goes all the way to Hamilton and south to Maryland, because I go to Conowingo Dam to shoot when the border's open. Is she talking walking trails?
I'm not sure.
Okay. eBird only shows you the roads that they found the sighting on. And that's fine to drive, but you don't know if there's a trail there. And so if you're looking for trails, you research conservation areas. And you go to Niagara Falls Conservation Parks, and they will always have lists of 10 or 15 different parks. And we use Google Earth down at the road level to find the entrances, and sometimes they show the pathways. But there's no well-defined one that would give you like 20 pages of the best places to walk. But I think on the Niagara River, on the Canadian side, if you can get across to the Canadian side, it's about 18 kilometers from Fort Erie through to Niagara Falls. And you can spend a whole day visiting the creeks and walking up along the creeks, taking some side roads there. And there aren't any conservation area parks right at the Niagara River. They're all backing off side roads. So you really have to search using the web to find the best ones.
I just put a link for Niagara Peninsula Conservation Authority that shows all the conservation areas.
Yeah. There are some private ones too. And the problem is some of them you have to pay for because they're private and they're trying to keep it up. And other ones, they just, because they used to have classes going there, kids going there for classes. And so, yeah, I don't have I got lots in my head, but I can't pull them up unless I brought my list up somewhere. Did I send you a list of all the names of
No.
parks that I had?
No.
I don't have it readily.
Sorry,
I
just a quick note that you have about 10 minutes left. And there's-
Oh, okay.
Yeah, there's no other questions so far. So if people want to ask questions, put them in the chat or in the Q&A as soon as you can, so we can try to get through as many of those as we can.
Okay, this is my 15 minutes of fame. It's a shameless self-publishing. I don't publish and I don't sell stuff online or anything like that. My wife and I belong to a camera club in the Fort Erie area, and we sell stuff there, but I don't sell anything. And we've sold more bird pictures through our through our art council than we have anywhere else. This is a freelance photographer for the Niagara Falls Review. And he showed up the one day when we went into Dufferin Islands and said, "Can I take a picture of you shooting birds?" And I said, "I'll do one better. You follow me and we'll set it up for you." And so this is my 7D Mark II with a Tamron 150 to 600 lens. And I said, I'll pretend I'm looking at a bird and you shoot. And then I said, better yet, I'll get you a bird to put in the shot. And so I put seeds on my toque, and the black-capped chickadees are always ready to come and land on your hand, land on your hat, land on your camera. And my picture ended up on the front page for the Dufferin Islands. So that's my shameless plug for me. This is where the events are taking place Friday and Saturday. This is the entryway. And we'll be setting up some stuff there, talking about cameras and settings and answering questions for an hour and a half, and walking through the park and hopefully getting some images. And that's another one of the trails there. That's about the position they're in today. It's a narrow path, lots of snow. And this is where all the Canada geese hang out and the ducks. It's all frozen now. This is about the only pathway that's open because it's flowing water. Am I going too fast? Are these reproducing well?
They look good.
Okay. So everybody knows what this one is. This is the birds that show up every spring here. And juncos. I'm trying to, dark-eyed junco. And there's another one. And I know they're there because we were there yesterday. These ones you'll see mostly in the river now because it's frozen over at the park. And they're the hooded mergansers. That's a female. And this is the common merganser. This is a red-winged, red-breasted nuthatch. Flying. And the noisy and always present in the spring red-winged blackbird families with their juveniles, and the babies that are always squawking. Another red-breasted nuthatch. Fighting woodpeckers, looking for space to make a nest on this pole. And there's a male red-breast, red-winged blackbird. It's not grown up yet. And this is the one everybody's hoping to find, and we haven't seen them around there, the tufted titmouse. Another shot of a tufted titmouse. Oh, this is a favorite duck that showed up this year. Black-bellied whistling duck. And it truly sounds like a whistle when it makes its noise. And it stands there and it'll walk right up to you to be fed. And it squawks. It'll just stand there, and it's competing with the other ducks there. And we think it came from as a pet from somewhere because it shouldn't be here. And we were worried about it, but they said it would survive the winter as long as it stuck with the rest of them. And we don't know what this one was. I think this came from a farm. I get these odd things showing up at Dufferin Islands all the time. And then we got the other mergansers, hooded merganser, again. Woodpeckers. And this is the white-breasted nuthatch. It's a little bigger than the other one. Sparrows. Great blue heron with little fish. Bluebird, eastern bluebird. Eastern kingbird. This guy, he just stood there squawking at us. I think he wanted to be fed. And golden crowned kinglet. We're down to a couple minutes left here.
Yeah, you got about 5.
5? Okay, am I going too fast through here? I have
do whatever you'd like.
I have lots I'd like to get to the area outside of Dufferin Islands. Here's some more egrets fighting. This is a green heron that flew by while I was shooting something else. These guys are very skittish, kingfisher. And this guy didn't even know I was taking his picture. I was from the car window on one of the creek overpasses, the bridge, and he was looking down river, and I just stuck the camera out and took his picture. And then he looked at me and he didn't fly even. He just said, "I'm too busy."
It's actually a female.
Is it? You can tell it's a female? All right.
The belt.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Golden crown kinglet again. And if you look at this picture, look here. There's a bug in focus that it was going after. And I got both of them. That's why I kept the image. Another hawk, night heron, red-bellied woodpecker, and everybody's favorite, European starlings, dirty birds. Okay, Niagara on the lake. We see a few long-tailed ducks. Flying ducks. Grebe. Okay, this is the one I wanted to get to because I love the next couple images. It's the areas back from the river in the back roads. We drive up and down, we put many, many miles on. Sandhill cranes. A lot of families of sandhill cranes staying the winter here now. We saw these guys in December of 2020. And they stayed all the way through the winter. And this guy was so close to me that I almost couldn't, I didn't have to crop it hardly. And he's looking at me like, well, we were standing behind the snow fence. And then I cropped it in. That's the detail I got. These birds are huge. I wouldn't want them to come after me with that beak.
That is gorgeous.
When they drive that beak in the ground, oh my God, it's like a jackhammer. And they pull out all kinds of worms and bugs and stuff. And it's amazing what they can do with those beaks. And their feet are huge. They walk in a muddy field and they don't sink down because they're big and fat. Also caught these guys. They were either mating or fighting over space to make a nest. The blue herons and their mating. These guys are bobbits. Bobbit? Yeah.
Bobolink.
Bobolink. And we've only seen them in one spot in this area. And we went back repeatedly and we saw them in the field sitting there, and they make a noise and they fly around, and there's no mistaking them, but it's hard to catch them because they flit very fast from reed to reed. Okay, this is another shameless showing for me. This is a tufted titmouse on a branch that we took at Dufferin Islands, and it won Best in Show at the Photographic Society of America. And that was through the Science Museum in Buffalo. They put my image in, and that's the actual picture that went into competition and actually went into their journal. So I'm very proud of that. And it made Best in Show, and there was only 5 images that went into their journal, and that was one of them. So it's a lot of fun doing photography, and I have become a huge birder. This is a long-eared owl. Some great shots. This is at the Canadian Raptor Center, and we visited there a couple times in the last few years, and they raise them all from babies. So they hardly even worry about letting them fly because they know where their food is and they always stay. This was taken at the canal, the East Pier in St. Catharines out by Lake Ontario. And it was one of the people that every day goes out. He set up a bird feeder out there for hummingbirds. And this would show up every 15 minutes, but you had to focus at 1/4,000th of a second to catch it. Well, that same one later in the season, when the bird feeder is gone, showed up at these almost dried up flowers. And we were looking for the bird feeder, didn't find it, but we found the hummingbird and got some great shots. This is another hawk at red-tailed hawk at the CRC. Certainly pictures that are hard to get in a normal location. This is snowy owls that appear in St. Catharines every year for the last several years, although this thing is 1,600 millimeters away from me. And that's why the person that asked about pixelation, that's pixelation right there. And the black ground is all dotted. That's pixelation. And you can see it's a little fuzzy, the picture. Here's a better picture that we got this year. This was taken January 13th of a bird sitting on a mound, and the field, it was only like 100 feet from us. And I shot it at 1,000th of a second, f/14, ISO 6400. And they're awesome to see, and we love it when they come down. This was at Malcolmson Park in St. Catharines, and it's a great horned owl and had 3 babies. And we watched them grow from two babies, and we watched them grow from just little wee things into fully grown owls. Also driving the back roads during the winter, we have come across this pheasant hopping along in the field, and we're successful in getting a few pictures of it. They're so colorful, just amazing to see them against the white snow. This was a hawk right close to our house, and it landed in the field while I was driving, and I pulled off the side, put my 4-ways on, and it ate that mouse while I was standing there taking pictures of it. And then it flew off, and it landed in a tree 10 feet from me. Like, what are you doing, buddy? This one was in a Carolinian forest on Sauer Road in Stevensville, and I've never seen it again. My friend said there's 2 of them there. I parked the car, and my wife didn't go with me, and she said, "You'll never see that thing, that's a big forest." And I almost gave up. I was walking along the road. I walked the whole thing. It's about a mile long, back and forth along the roadway, looking into the woods to see an owl. And I just put my camera down, and I looked up, and it was sitting there looking at me 20 feet away. And I was, oh my God, oh my God. And I was able to get my camera up, and I took all the details out of it. But I took maybe 100 pictures of that thing, and when I looked the next time, it was gone. They fly so silent, you can't tell when they disappear. Now, here's the best owl picture, and have you ever seen an owl dressed to kill? This one is dressed to kill. He's got his best shoes and tie on, and he's ready to go. And I just had to play around at the end here. And thank you for watching. I hope you got something out of it.